I think at some point every autistic YouTube creator makes a video about love on the spectrum, so today, here's mine. Now, before I start, I don't want to disparage anybody for watching and liking Love on the Spectrum because we know that many autistic people find representation in Love on the Spectrum. Certainly, I can relate in terms of dating as an autistic person or when I dated. And it's really clear that the cast of Love on the Spectrum are really authentic people. But in terms of the show, I think actually it's really disingenuous at times, and I'm going to tell you the reasons why. One of the things that has bothered me most about this show is the display of wealth that we see in terms of many of the cast members' family homes. And this feels very much like a production decision because these homes are so aesthetically pleasing. They look utterly beautiful on screen. But come off it, how many autistic people do you know that grew up in a house like this? Their houses are just, impossible dreams, aren't they? And they're in a fortunate position where they're having all of their support needs met because their families can afford them. And for me, this really is not representative of the autistic experience because so many of us in the world just aren't able to have our needs met, and many autistic people with higher support needs aren't having their needs met. So for me, it just feels really uncomfortable. And I guess it's interesting to see the introduction of Dylan in season 4. He lives in a one-bed apartment with his mum. So I guess they've had some backlash with regard to showing the homes of obviously wealthy families because, yeah, it just feels ridiculous to me. Another thing that bothers me about this show is that it advertises itself as a documentary or docu-series when, of course, it's a reality show. Love on the Spectrum has won Emmys for being a reality show, so of course we have this confirmation, but also in terms of visual styling on this show, there's a lot of vibrant colour correction going on in post-production, so it has like a Moorish quality to it, or a visual Moorish quality, and very often we'll have like a cliffhanger at the end of every episode or a moment of jeopardy that makes you want to immediately dive into the next episode, which is such a hallmark of reality TV, isn't it? Reality shows will often kind of manufacture situations to create a little bit of interest or appeal or even a bit of drama. And I don't know about you, but could you sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow right now without knowing what the lyrics are? Because I know for damn sure I would not be able to. And as a little experiment, I'm going to ask Ian. Ian, do you know all the words to Somewhere Over the Rainbow?
I know the words Somewhere Over the Rainbow, way up high. After that, no, that's it. Repeat.
I find it really interesting that one of the final scenes we see of season 4 is at Madison and Tyler's engagement party, and they all start singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow and they know all the words, which seems, I don't know, a bit unlikely to me. The engagement scene was filmed during rainy season in Florida, so the chances of having a rainbow appear were, I'd say, pretty high. We don't always see them singing in front of the rainbow, so it could have been an amalgam of clever editing, really. But, I'm a massive cynic when it comes to this kind of thing. I just feel like the production team would have really liked the idea of having the cast sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow as a really kind of uplifting and wholesome scene for one of the final scenes in this series. And aside from the reality show / documentary debates, rather worryingly, I saw Love on the Spectrum being described as a comedy show on this podcast, which popped up on my Instagram.
And I don't mean it. Look, let me say this. Because this show is a comedy show,
And I find it utterly despairing that the lives of autistic people are being described in this way. And it's clear Love on the Spectrum has much to do when it comes to true representation of autistic people. Another thing that I was really uncomfortable with in terms of Love on the Spectrum season 4 is a scene with Madison and Tyler, and a fan shouts Maddie at Madison, and she is extremely uncomfortable with this, and she says it's one of her triggers. And Madison is clearly distressed, and what worries me about this is Love on the Spectrum is a hugely well-known show, isn't it? And the chances of this happening again for Madison in somebody yelling Maddie at her is really high, isn't it? And we know that many autistic people struggle with fame, and I'm thinking in terms of Sia here. But she's, of course, a really divisive figure, isn't she, among the autistic community, really due to the portrayal of autism in her film Music, and for doubling down after receiving an enormous amount of criticism. But Sia has discussed in the past how difficult she's found fame, and it led to her starting to wear these kind of huge wigs, which essentially act as a disguise so that she feels more anonymous in her day-to-day life. Susan Boyle is an autistic woman who won Britain's Got Talent some years ago, and she really struggled with her rise to fame, and it led to experts asking about the duty of care that ITV had in respect to its contestants. But of course, nothing ever came of it. And I'm also thinking of Blind Boy, who is an Irish podcaster and writer and musician, and he wears a plastic bag as a mask because he is fiercely protective of his privacy. And even me, on a tiny little YouTube channel, I really struggle with being recognised, so it's led to me wearing my YouTube uniform, and I essentially always look the same in my videos because I think it lessens the chance of people recognising me outside of YouTube, because I can wear different outfits and, wear my hair differently, and that acts as like a safety buffer for me. But Madison has a really distinctive, unique style. She is a jewellery designer, so she is accustomed to wearing her jewellery out and about, which of course acts as an advertisement for her creations. And why shouldn't she do this? She's clearly proud of her creative work, and this is her way of showing it off. But I do worry about the cast going about their daily lives and being recognised by people, and how they might deal with that as autistic people. And even Connor said on a recent podcast that the tone of comments that he gets online has kind of changed really since doing season 4 and the breakup of his relationship with Georgie, in that they're a lot more negative now. And I think this is something that's really difficult to deal with, and particularly if this is something that you're receiving on a regular basis. So I do wonder what has been set in place for the cast in terms of navigating this kind of new world where they're really well-known people, and what support measures have been put in place to help them with this. I think also it's difficult to know if the participants on the show feel like they've been fairly represented in this reality show. And I'm thinking in terms of I don't know whether it was a reel or a short, but Shelley spoke recently about her relationship with James, and in terms of Love on the Spectrum, we regularly hear James talk over Shelley, and she's rarely given the opportunity to talk, really. So one watching the show might feel that that's how their relationship works, in that James talks over Shelley all the time. But Shelley says that in terms of when the camera's rolling, James feels really energetic, whereas Shelley feels a lot more inhibited, and she's constantly worried about how she's going to be portrayed on the show. And for me, that's really concerning. We're being shown a side of James that actually isn't wholly representative of who he is. So it's really easy to make uninformed judgments about the participants on this show. Now, I think it's really well known that the participants on this show aren't paid, and I think that's absolutely appalling. You know, these cast members are being thrown into the limelight. They're all very well known people now as a result of Love on the Spectrum, and one might argue that they've had loads of exposure on this programme, so they can go off and create their own social network accounts, and many of them have done. But let me tell you, as an artist, I've heard this "you'll get loads of exposure" arguments throughout my whole career, and it is absolutely offensive nonsense. If a plumber came to fix your loo, do you think it would be acceptable to say to them, "I'm not actually going to pay you for this job, but what I will do is to tell everybody on Facebook how great your work is, so you'll get loads of work as a result of that"? And when you boil it down to this, do you think that plumber is going to come out and do that job? Because I don't think so. People should be paid for their time and their efforts, whether they're a plumber, whether they're an artist, or whether they're appearing on Love on the Spectrum. So the creators of Love on the Spectrum don't pay their cast members, that much is clear, but they do say that all expenses are covered, as they don't want to leave anybody out of pocket. Okay, so if this is true, why is it that when James went out for a date with Emma in season 2, we see them splitting the bill?
So I would have no problem whatsoever paying for the entire meal if you don't mind.
Oh, I don't mind shipping in though.
And while I'm sure that James and Emma would be able to claim back the costs for the meal, why didn't the production staff just pay it on the day? Could it be that they wanted to create further tension within the scene? You know, going on a date is stressful enough, but if you're going for a meal, you've then got to negotiate who's going to pay the bill and if you're going to split the bill. And I'm sure James and Emma were already feeling really nervous, but to have this at the end of the meal just creates further anxiety, and I'm really uncomfortable that they included this. James and Emma were there to film Love on the Spectrum, so Love on the Spectrum should have picked up the bill on the day. And we see something similar actually in season 4 when James and Shelley go out for a meal and they mistakenly order an additional side dish, which is some kind of potato dish, which they don't like and don't eat.
I thought the potatoes were included.
Yeah, I thought it was included.
And you can see at the end of the meal, they're really concerned and a bit worried that they've ordered these potatoes and didn't eat them, but this should have been picked up straight away by Love on the Spectrum. You know, why are James and Shelley seeing this bill? It just feels like a little bit of additional drama for the TV show. Love on the Spectrum has fallen for this because when we look back at the Australian series, Maddie goes on a date with Mark and there follows a really awkward sequence where they're trying to negotiate who's going to pay for the bill.
Would you like to split?
Actually, I'll pay on this.
Yeah. Rest on the card?
Yes. Okay.
I feel like there was no reason to do this. Dating is stressful enough. You know, if you're having a meal with somebody that you don't know and you're having to try and come up with conversation and you've got cameras essentially shoved in your face, it's really anxiety inducing, or certainly that's how I would feel. And to have the added complication of having to negotiate payments when it would have been paid through expenses anyway feels really unfair to me. Now, I stumbled across this Guardian article fairly recently and I found it really interesting. It's actually an interview with Ruth and Thomas, who I'm sure many of you will recognise from Love on the Spectrum Australia. So the pair featured on the first season and they were approached to participate in the second Australian series, and if they could get a wriggle on with their wedding plans so that they coincided with the filming schedule, Netflix would pay all their wedding costs. This offer made them feel uneasy, and they believed that they were participants in a documentary, and they were happy to receive no payments for their participation. Ruth says filming it would have felt too structured, poised, out of my control, and in the hands of a corporation whom I didn't want to share a big events with. And I totally get why they wouldn't want to be involved with this, but I can't help but think about Madison and Tyler's wedding coming up and what discussions have been or are going on behind the scenes at Love on the Spectrum. I know that, however, Madison is really keen to be on Say Yes to the Dress, so it may well be that Love on the Spectrum has a bit of a battle in covering their wedding, who knows. Thomas goes on to say that the original series was pitched to them as a documentary series about people with autism and relationships. And I think they've done a decent job of showing Ruth and my relationship, but I think the rest of the first season was sitting on the fence between a documentary series and a reality TV programme. And I think come season 2, it definitely leaned heavily that way. We lost interest after that. I'd agree actually that the segments with Ruth and Thomas do feel more kind of traditional documentary in style, in that they're more kind of laid back. But I think the early signs of Love on the Spectrum tropes, such as Lizzie really likes the Beatles, but she doesn't like techno music, were definitely there. While the couple attempted to return to normal life after their brief time in the spotlights, it took much longer to psychologically heal, they say, from online bullying. This is so concerning. The production company says that a duty of care was a cornerstone of Love on the Spectrum, and participants are offered access to a qualified psychologist during filming and after broadcast, and are provided with social media training with guidance on privacy settings and how to manage or limit online engagements. And interestingly, in response to this, Ruth and Thomas say that they received no advice nor support on how to navigate negative feedback on social media after the first season went on air, nor were they offered any psychological supports. And I think this is really shocking. Why on earth weren't these measures put in place for the participants of this show? I feel like they were really let down. And Ruth finally goes on to say, the online abusers can frankly shove it. But in Australia, Love on the Spectrum was shown as a doco on free-to-air TV before Netflix bought it. Now that Netflix owns it, I think they could stand to pay us. And I think they could stand to pay the participants. There's a lot of people making a lot of money out of this show, and it's very clear that the cast members aren't seeing any of it, which seems wholly unfair to me. For me, it's great to see that there is a space for a programme about autism on a kind of mainstream level. But for me, I would be far more interested in seeing a proper documentary on autistic people, made by autistic people, ideally, without all the gloss of a reality TV show. You know, I would much rather see the lives of autistic people, not only in dating, but how they navigate the world as an autistic person. And I think when a documentary about autism is done well, not only does it act as true representation for autistic people, it also acts as an educational device for people who don't know about autism, and it gives them an opportunity to learn about autism from autistic people. And thirdly, and I think this is really important, it would also act as an opportunity to inform autistic people who don't yet know they're autistic, that they're autistic. And I think the three elements there of representation, education, and providing an opportunity for people to find out that they're autistic would be the hallmarks of a really brilliant documentary. And this makes me think actually of John Davidson, who is a Tourette's advocate, and he's done loads of work throughout all of his life. Even as a young lad, he's featured on a number of documentaries, and he's really informed and educated people. And I'd love to see the same actually for autistic people. I would love to see a documentary that features autistic people, both with higher support needs and lower support needs, to educate the world about what autism is. So there we have it. There are just some of my thoughts on Love on the Spectrum, and in all honesty, I could speak a lot more on this because there are just so many facets of this show, and everything within it that creates a lot of discussion points, doesn't it? But maybe it's something that I'll come back to at some point. But these are the points that have been really bugging me above all others. So anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on Love on the Spectrum, so leave them down below. And that's it for today, so thank you for watching. Give it a like if you got this far. Comments would always be appreciated, and if you don't know what to say, leave an orange heart down in comments for friendship, and I'll see you again soon.